Margaret stood at table 7, her hands trembling slightly as she held the microphone. The anniversary party glowed around her soft amber lights, the gentle clink of champagne glasses, faces she'd known for decades. Her husband Robert sat at the head table, his smile frozen as he watched her rise. 40 years. 40 years of marriage they were celebrating tonight. But Margaret had a different speech prepared than the one Robert expected. Let me take you back to the beginning. Margaret was 23 when she met Robert at a summer company picnic in 1985. He was charming, ambitious, with dark hair that fell across his forehead when he laughed. She was a secretary at the firm where he'd just started as a junior accountant. Their courtship was traditional dinners at Italian restaurants, walks through the park, his mother's approval sought and given. They married that winter in a small church ceremony. Margaret wore her mother's pearls. Robert promised to love and cherish her. She believed him completely. The early years were good. They bought a modest home with blue shutters in a quiet neighborhood. Margaret kept working until their daughter Emma was born, then devoted herself to creating a warm home. Robert climbed steadily up the corporate ladder. Every evening, he'd come home to pot roast or meatloaf, kiss her cheek, and read the newspaper while she cleaned the kitchen. It wasn't passion, but it was partnership. Or so Margaret thought. 20 years into their marriage, Margaret noticed small changes. Robert worked later hours. His secretary, Linda, called the house frequently with urgent matters. He bought new cologne, started going to the gym. Margaret pushed down her suspicions. She was 53 years old, her hair turning silver, her waist thicker than in their wedding photos. Of course, a younger, vibrant secretary might turn her husband's head. Margaret had been taught that a good wife simply tried harder. So she did. She lost 15 pounds, bought new dresses, made his favorite desserts. Robert barely noticed. The truth came on an ordinary Tuesday. Margaret was shopping for groceries when she saw them, Robert and Linda, holding hands in the parking lot of a restaurant across town. Linda was laughing at something Robert said, touching his arm the way Margaret used to when they were young. Margaret sat in her car for 30 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, her heart breaking into pieces. That night, when Robert came home, she said nothing. She served dinner, she smiled, and she began to plan. Margaret wasn't impulsive. She spent weeks thinking, observing, understanding. She learned that Robert and Linda had been seeing each other for 3 years. 3 years of lies. 3 years of Margaret cooking dinners, while her husband was falling in love with someone else. She discovered that Linda was married to a man named David, a contractor who worked long hours and trusted his wife completely, just like Margaret had trusted Robert. And that's when Margaret had her idea. She befriended Linda's husband without revealing who she was. A chance meeting at a coffee shop, casual conversations about life and marriage and how sometimes people we love disappoint us. David was kind, lonely in ways he didn't quite understand. His wife had been distant lately, he confessed. Always texting, always busy. Margaret listened. She sympathized. And slowly, carefully, she helped David see the truth. The night of the anniversary party arrived. Margaret had planned every detail. She'd invited everyone important in their lives, Robert's colleagues, their neighbors, old friends from college, their daughter Emma with her family. And yes, she'd made sure Linda and David received an invitation too. Robert had been puzzled by that. Why invite my secretary to our anniversary party? Because, Margaret had said sweetly, she's been such an important part of your life these past few years. It would be rude not to include her. Robert had no good reason to object without revealing too much. Now, standing at table 7 with the microphone, Margaret looked around the room. Robert sat rigid, sensing something wrong. Linda had gone pale when Margaret stood up. David sat beside his wife, his jaw tight, his eyes knowing. Good evening, everyone, Margaret began, her voice steady. Thank you all for celebrating 40 years of marriage with Robert and me. 40 years is a long time, long enough to build a life together, long enough to raise a beautiful daughter, long enough. She paused, letting the silence stretch, long enough to learn who someone really is. The room had gone quiet. Robert stood up. Margaret, maybe we should sit down, Robert, she said gently, and something in her tone made him obey. I wanted to thank someone special tonight, Margaret continued. Someone who has been my husband's rock for the past 3 years. Someone who has given him comfort and companionship during those long evenings he claimed to be working late. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Linda was trying to leave, but David had placed a firm hand on her arm. I'd like to thank Linda Hutchinson, Margaret said, gesturing toward table 7. Robert's secretary, and the woman he's been having an affair with since our 37th anniversary. The room erupted. Robert was shouting. Linda was crying. Their daughter, Emma, sat frozen in shock. But Margaret wasn't finished. I also want to thank Linda's husband, David, who is here tonight. David, I'm sorry you had to learn this way, but I thought you deserved to know the truth. Just as I deserve to know it. Margaret looked directly at Robert. I've filed for divorce. The papers are being served on Monday. I've documented everything, the credit card statements from hotels, the gifts you bought her with our money, the lies you told me for 3 years. Robert's face had gone from red to white. Margaret, please, we can talk about this. We're done talking, she said quietly. I gave you 40 years. I gave you my youth, my trust, my love, and you thanked me by betraying everything we built. She turned to the crowd. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the evening. The dinner is paid for. The band will play. I just needed everyone to know the truth before I left. Margaret set down the microphone and walked toward the door. Emma caught up with her in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. Emma, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Margaret hugged her daughter tight. I know, sweetheart, and this doesn't change anything between us. But I'm done being quiet. I'm done pretending everything is fine when it isn't. Where will you go? Emma asked. Margaret smiled a real smile. The first in months. I bought a little cottage by the lake, just for me. I'm going to wake up every morning and have coffee on the porch and remember who I was before I spent 40 years making myself smaller for a man who didn't appreciate it. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Robert married Linda 6 months after that, but the marriage lasted less than a year. Turned out, David had also divorced Linda, and she'd found herself alone, her reputation in tatters. Margaret heard this through the grapevine and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a quiet peace. She'd spent her first year of freedom rediscovering herself. She took painting classes, volunteered at the animal shelter, made friends with other women who'd survived their own betrayals and heartbreaks. Her daughter visited every Sunday. They'd sit on the porch, watching the lake, talking about everything and nothing. Emma apologized repeatedly for not seeing the signs, but Margaret assured her there was nothing to forgive. Your father and I built something real once, Margaret would say. And that gave me you. I don't regret the good years. I just refused to give him any more of my life. 2 years after the anniversary party, Margaret met someone. His name was Thomas, a widower who'd lost his wife to cancer. They met at an art gallery, both admiring the same painting, a landscape of mountains at sunrise. They dated slowly, carefully. Thomas never rushed her, never demanded more than she was ready to give. They talked for hours about life and loss and starting over. When he first kissed her, Margaret cried. Not from sadness, but from the shock of feeling cherished again. I wasted so much time, she told him one evening on her porch. You didn't waste it, Thomas said gently. You survived it. There's a difference. Margaret thought about that. About the years she'd spent being the perfect wife, the quiet supporter, the woman who made everyone else comfortable at the cost of her own happiness. I won't be that person again, she said. Good, Thomas replied. I don't want that person. I want you exactly as you are right now. Robert tried to contact her occasionally. Emails saying he'd made a mistake. Letters asking if they could talk. Margaret deleted them without responding. She owed him nothing, not her anger, not her forgiveness, not even her attention. Linda sent a letter once, apologizing. Margaret read it, felt a distant pity for the woman who'd also been discarded when she was no longer convenient, and threw the letter away. Some betrayals don't deserve closure. They deserve to be left behind on what would have been her 45th anniversary. Margaret sat on her porch with Thomas, watching the sunset paint the lake gold and pink. Any regrets? He asked. Margaret thought about standing up at that anniversary party, about the shock on Robert's face, about walking away from 40 years of her life. Only one, she said. I wish I'd done it sooner. Thomas squeezed her hand. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in decades. She felt free.